The neural suppressor hummed with a malevolent frequency, its crystalline tendrils boring into Commander Sarah Chen's skull. She tasted blood. Her own or someone else's. It no longer mattered. The Dominar interrogation chamber was a masterpiece of psychological torture, designed to break even the most resilient minds. Holographic displays flickered around her, showing the systematic destruction of human colonies. Billions of lives reduced to statistics, star systems transformed into barren resource extraction zones. The Dominar's clinical efficiency was almost beautiful in its brutality. Almost. Chen's left eye twitched, not from pain, but from a carefully orchestrated micro-muscle response. To the Dominar's sophisticated scanning systems, it appeared to be a simple involuntary reaction. In reality, it was a coded signal, a microscopic communication that had been years in the making. The chief interrogator, a towering biomechanical entity named Vortal, adjusted its translation matrix. Its voice emerged as a clinical monotone. Human Subject 7 Gamma, your resistance is mathematically improbable. The neural mapping of your species indicates a 99.8% probability of complete psychological capitulation. A holographic display materialized, showing Chen's service record, her face during her last military engagement. Before the fall, was a study in defiance. Decorated captain, survivor of the Saturn blockade, specialist in adaptive warfare. The Dominar had meticulously studied her, believing knowledge equaled control. They were wrong. The chamber's temperature dropped precisely 0.3 degrees, another signal. Chen's muscles tensed imperceptibly. The bacterial explosive compound she had cultivated was reaching its activation threshold. Years of careful manipulation, of hiding microscopic genetic modifications within her own cellular structure, were about to bear fruit. Vortal continued its clinical assessment. Your neural pathways show remarkable plasticity. Unprecedented, even. This is why you were selected for extended study. A mechanical appendage extended, preparing to interface with Chen's neural implant. We will understand the anomaly that is human resistance. Chen's lips curved into the slightest smile. The first explosion was internal. A carefully engineered bacterial cluster detonated within her bloodstream, creating a localized electromagnetic pulse that momentarily disrupted the neural suppressor. The Dominar's sophisticated technology flickered, just for a microsecond. But a microsecond was all she needed. Alarms blared. Vortal's biomechanical components began to short-circuit. The interrogation chamber's meticulously controlled environment descended into chaos. Chen's neural implant, which the Dominar believed was completely subdued, came alive with a surge of stored potential energy. Information began to flow. Encrypted communication patterns, hidden within her very genetic structure, activated. Each cell became a transmission node, a tiny rebellion against the Dominar's control. The prison colony's communication systems began to experience cascading failures. Vortal's mechanical limbs flailed, trying to re-establish control. Impossible, it repeated, its translation matrix breaking down. Mathematical improbability. System integrity, compromised. Chen stood. The neural suppressor hung in fragments around her neck, like a broken chain. Her movement was fluid, controlled, nothing like the broken prisoner they had studied for months. Each step was a calculated message. Humanity was not defeated. Not even close. Outside the interrogation chamber, other prisoners began to react. Subtle movements. Synchronized micro-rebellions that the Dominar's predictive algorithms could not comprehend. A bacterial signal, a genetic communication network that transformed an entire population into a living, breathing resistance. The first explosion rocked the facility. Then another, and another. Vortal's final transmission was a burst of pure mathematical confusion. How could a species so thoroughly mapped, so completely understood, still find ways to resist? Commander Sarah Chen knew the answer. Humanity's greatest strength was never its technology. It was the ability to transform, to adapt, to turn even the most sophisticated systems of control into instruments of liberation. The prison colony burned, and from its ashes, a revolution was born. The underground workshop pulsed with a rhythm that was part machine, part living organism. Dr. Elena Rodriguez moved between workstations like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of rebellion. Every surface was a canvas of human ingenuity. Dismantled Dominar technology repurposed into something entirely new, something the alien overlords could never anticipate. Holographic schematics hung in the air, displaying what looked like a starship, but was so much more. It wasn't just a vehicle of war. It was a living system, a biological-mechanical hybrid that defied every known principle of engineering and biological integration. 37 attempts, Rodriguez muttered, her hands moving with surgical precision. A neural interface chip, no larger than a human fingernail, sat before her, its surface a fractal landscape of quantum circuits and bioorganic processors. Each failure had been a lesson, each destroyed prototype, a step closer to something revolutionary. The workshop itself was a marvel of hidden engineering. Located beneath an abandoned Dominar mining complex, it drew power through a network of hijacked geothermal taps and repurposed energy conduits. Massive cooling systems, cobbled together from mining equipment and stolen medical refrigeration units, kept the temperature precisely controlled. Around her, a team of 12 engineers worked in absolute synchronization. They were survivors, each bearing the scars of Dominar occupation, each bringing a unique skill set that seemed impossible to combine. A former agricultural drone programmer worked alongside a quantum cryptography specialist. A teenager who had grown up in the mining colonies collaborated with a retired military systems analyst. Rodriguez picked up the neural interface, examining it under a microscope that was itself a work of stolen and modified technology. The chip was alive, quite literally. Organic neural networks had been carefully integrated with quantum computing circuits, creating a system that could think, adapt, and learn in ways no artificial intelligence had ever achieved. Final integration sequence, she called out. The workshop fell into a tense silence. The power draw was massive. Backup generators spun up, their sound a low growl of potential energy. The workstations dimmed as every available electron was channeled into the prototype starship's systems. The vessel wasn't sitting on a traditional landing platform. Instead, it was suspended in a magnetic containment field, its hull a shifting mass of metamaterials that seemed to breathe and pulse. Traditional spacecraft were rigid, defined. This was something else entirely, a living system that could reconfigure itself at the molecular level. Rodriguez's assistants began the connection process. Massive cables, insulated with a compound that was part ceramic, part living tissue, snaked toward the ship's neural interface points. Each connection was a delicate dance of technology and biology. Initiating quantum entanglement sequence, announced Marcos, a former communication network engineer. His hands moved across a holographic interface that looked more like a living ecosystem than a control panel. The ship began to hum. But it wasn't the mechanical vibration of traditional spacecraft. This was a sound that seemed to emerge from somewhere between physics and consciousness. A resonance that spoke of potential, of something waiting to be unleashed. Bioelectric stabilization at 72%, called out another technician. Quantum coherence holding steady. Rodriguez knew they were doing more than building a weapon. They were creating the new form of existence, a hybrid of human consciousness and technological potential. Each system was designed to do more than function. It was designed to feel, to adapt, to survive. The neural interface wasn't just a connection point. It was a bridge between human experience and machine potential. Memories, traumas, hopes, all could be transformed into computational power. The Dominar's most sophisticated predictive algorithms would be useless against a system that could literally think and feel in ways they couldn't comprehend. Final integration in 3. Marcos counted down. 2. 1. The ship came alive. It wasn't a mechanical activation. It was an awakening. Pure, unfiltered potential crackling with the collective energy of human resistance. Dr. Rodriguez allowed herself the smallest smile. The Dominar thought they had broken humanity. They had no idea what was coming. The neural interface training chamber was nothing like a traditional simulator. Massive quantum resonance fields shimmered around Commander Sarah Chen, transforming the space into a living, breathing computational ecosystem. Her consciousness teetered on the edge of something impossible, a fusion of human memory and machine potential that defied every known law of cognitive science. Dr. Rodriguez watched from the observation platform, her fingers dancing across a holographic control interface that looked more like a living organism than a piece of technology. Neural synchronization at 87%, she called out. Quantum coherence holding at critical threshold. Chen's body remained perfectly still, suspended in a neural conductive gel that amplified the connection between her consciousness and the ship's quantum neural network. But her mind was everywhere and nowhere. A memory surfaced, not her own. Hiroshi Tanaka, a jazz musician from Old Earth, killed during the first Dominar invasion of the North American coastal zones. His final moments weren't of fear, but of sublime musical composition, a mental symphony that captured the essence of human creativity in the face of total destruction. The ship's computational matrix suddenly reconfigured. The simulation around Chen transformed. What had been a standard combat scenario against 50 Dominar defense drones became something entirely unexpected. The ship's approach was no longer a straightforward tactical assault. It was a performance, each movement calculated with the precise rhythm of a jazz improvisation. The drones never stood a chance. Where traditional AI would calculate optimal attack vectors, this hybrid system created something more. It anticipated. It interpreted. It felt. Impossible, muttered Dr. Rodriguez, watching the simulation unfold. The ship moved like no weapon she had ever seen. Fluid, unpredictable, almost musical in its destructive capability. A second memory emerged. Maria Gonzalez, a teenage hacker from the Buenos Aires underground resistance. Her final act of defiance had been a complex computer virus that had temporarily disabled an entire Dominar communication network. Her code was a work of art, each line a perfect blend of mathematical precision and raw human emotion. The ship's systems began to resonate with these memories, not just process them, integrate them. Chen's consciousness expanded. She wasn't piloting the ship anymore. She was the ship. Memories became computational pathways. Traumas transformed into adaptive algorithms. The collective experience of human resistance flowed through quantum neural networks like liquid thought. Neural synchronization at 93%. Rodriguez called out, her voice a mix of scientific precision and barely contained excitement. Quantum entanglement reaching critical mass. The simulation ended. 50 advanced Dominar defense drones destroyed in a manner that defied all predictive modeling. The attack pattern was pure chaos, pure human creativity. Chen opened her eyes, but they weren't just her eyes anymore. It's not just a neural interface, she said, her voice carrying a resonance that wasn't entirely human. It's a memory engine, a consciousness amplifier. Dr. Rodriguez approached the neural gel chamber. Each ship will be more than a weapon, she explained. It will be a living repository of human experience. Every memory of resistance, every moment of defiance, transformed into computational potential. The implications were staggering. The Dominar's most sophisticated predictive algorithms relied on mathematical certainty, on the belief that consciousness could be mapped, controlled, predicted. But human memory, human experience, was fundamentally nonlinear, unpredictable. A weapon that could think like a jazz musician, fight like a teenage hacker, survive like generations of human resistance fighters. We're not just building ships, Chen said, her consciousness still partially merged with the quantum neural network. We're building a living memory of human potential. Outside the training chamber, the first prototype ship pulsed with an energy that was part machine, part pure human spirit. Waiting, learning, preparing to show the Dominar exactly what humanity was capable of becoming. The Dominar believed in absolute control. A network of quantum surveillance satellites monitored every human settlement, every communication channel, every potential point of resistance. What they didn't understand was that resistance had become something far more subtle, far more dangerous. In the agricultural zones of Epsilon 9, what appeared to be a standard crop rotation was actually a complex communication network. Each row of genetically modified wheat was a message. The angle of plant growth, the microscopic variations in chlorophyll density, these were coordinates, transmission points, a language the Dominar's algorithms could never decode. Aisha Nakamura watched from a hidden observation post, her augmented eyes scanning the fields with a precision that blended human intuition with technological enhancement. She was the architect of the Resistance's most ambitious project, a distributed communication and preparation network that transformed entire planetary populations into a single, living organism of rebellion. Sector 7 reporting, whispered a voice through her neural comm. It was Marcus, a 12-year-old who worked as a maintenance drone operator in the mining complexes. To the Dominar, he was just another disposable worker. In reality, he was a key node in the Resistance's intelligence network. The communication was encoded in the rhythm of his work. A slight pause here. A millisecond-long deviation in a maintenance drone's flight path there. Each movement a piece of encrypted information that would take the Dominar's most sophisticated decryption systems weeks to even recognize as a pattern. In the orbital refineries, workers transformed industrial equipment into potential weapons. A cooling system became a precision electromagnetic pulse generator. A mining laser's calibration system could be repurposed into a ship-to-ship communication disruptor. Every piece of technology was a potential weapon. Every worker a potential resistance fighter. Commander Chen's squadron of 12 ships was more than a military unit. It was a Trojan horse of unprecedented complexity. Each vessel looked like a standard maintenance craft to the Dominar's scanning systems. Unremarkable, disposable. But beneath their mundane exterior, they carried technologies that would fundamentally rewrite the rules of galactic conflict. Dr. Rodriguez had developed a molecular camouflage system that was nothing short of miraculous. The ships could alter their electromagnetic signature, their thermal output, even their fundamental molecular structure. To any scanning system, they would appear as nothing more than routine maintenance vessels shuttling between mining colonies. Preparation sequence gamma initiating, Nakamura muttered, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that seemed to breathe with living information. In the agricultural zones, the wheat fields began to move, not with wind, not with any natural motion, but with a precision that suggested something more. Each plant became a transmission node, the living communication array that could convey complex information through microscopic changes in growth patterns. The mining colonies became something else entirely. What appeared to be routine resource extraction was actually a massive planet-wide preparation. Entire populations were being transformed into a single interconnected resistance network. A child's playground game became a communication protocol. The way maintenance workers moved between workstations told a story of preparation. Even the dust kicked up by transport vehicles carried encoded information, microscopic markers that could be read by the Resistance's quantum communication network. Marcus's voice came through again. Primary injection complete. Dominar surveillance systems show 0 anomalies. Nakamura allowed herself the smallest smile. The Dominar's greatest weakness was their belief in absolute control. They saw patterns. Humans created chaos. And in that chaos, a revolution was being born. The 12 ships of Commander Chen's squadron sat in their hidden launch bays. To any external scanning system, they were unremarkable, disposable, forgettable. They were anything but. Each vessel carried the collective hope of a species that refused to be subjugated. Each system was a weapon. Each memory a potential attack vector. The Dominar thought they understood humanity. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The moment of attack arrived like a quantum whisper. Commander Sarah Chen's neural interface erupted with a symphony of collective consciousness. 12 ships moved as a single organism, each vessel an extension of a distributed intelligence that defied every known principle of tactical engagement. The Dominar's primary defense grid, a network of quantum-locked battle stations that had systematically crushed hundreds of resistance movements, didn't just fail. It was unmade. Initiating quantum cascade, Chen's voice emerged simultaneously from 12 different points in space, a linguistic impossibility that would later baffle xenolinguists and computational theorists. The first wave of Dominar defense platforms never saw it coming. Each of Chen's ships carried a payload beyond conventional weaponry, adaptive nanoviruses that didn't just penetrate computational systems, they rewrote them. Where traditional cyber warfare attempted to breach defenses, these viral networks became the defense system. A Dominar battle station's weapon array suddenly found its targeting systems hijacked. Precision-guided plasma cannons that had obliterated entire planetary resistance movements now turned on their own support networks. The ships didn't just attack, they transformed the very concept of technological warfare. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from the quantum communication hub, her hands moving across holographic interfaces that pulsed with living data. Quantum entanglement at maximum resonance, she reported, her voice a blend of scientific precision and barely contained excitement. The nanoviruses were more than code. They were living computational organisms that understood context, adapted in real time, and carried the collective traumatic memory of human resistance. Each line of their genetic algorithm was a testament to survival, to a species that had been pushed to the brink and found strength in that darkness. Marcus, the young maintenance drone operator, provided real-time intelligence. His neural link transformed the entire agricultural and mining network into a living sensor array. Information flowed not in binary streams, but in complex, emotion-laden quantum packets that the Dominar's most sophisticated decryption systems couldn't even recognize as communication. Defense platforms experiencing recursive cognitive dissonance, Marcus reported. The technical language masked the poetry of what was actually happening. The Dominar's own technological superiority was being used to unmake their control. Chen's lead ship, a vessel that was more living organism than traditional spacecraft, began to transform. Molecular structures shifted. Weapon systems emerged from hull configurations that defied traditional engineering. A plasma cannon would dissolve, only to be replaced by a quantum disruption field that could literally unmake the structural integrity of opposing vessels. The Dominar fleet's initial response was predictably algorithmic, precise, calculated, utterly unsuited to combat an enemy that didn't follow any known rules of engagement. Entire battle groups found their quantum communication networks infected. Navigation systems began to hallucinate impossible spatial coordinates. Weapon targeting became a nightmare of recursive logic loops that folded back on themselves. "They're trying to understand," Rodriguez muttered. "But understanding requires a framework, and we just destroyed their framework." The 12 ships moved like a living neural network. No traditional command structure. No linear attack pattern. Each vessel was simultaneously a weapon, a communication node, and a living memory repository of human resistance. A Dominar heavy cruiser attempted to launch a counterattack. Its massive particle beam weapon charge, a technological marvel that had crushed countless resistance movements. But before it could fire, the weapon's own quantum stabilization matrix was rewritten. The particle beam turned inward, consuming the ship from inside its own computational core. Chen's consciousness expanded. She wasn't just commanding the attack. She was the attack. Memories of resistance fighters, moments of human defiance, generations of survival against impossible odds, all transformed into a weapon that the Dominar could never comprehend. First wave neutralized, Chen reported. But it wasn't a military report. It was a declaration of something more profound. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival. Humanity was rewriting the very rules of existence. The broadcast began as a whisper, then became a storm. Dr. Aisha Nakamura watched in awe as the neural interface transformed from a weapon of war into something far more profound. The communication network wasn't just transmitting information, it was transmitting experience. Raw, unfiltered human consciousness flooded across the Dominar's most secure communication channels. A memory from a concentration camp survivor. The last song of a musician moments before execution. A child's first moment of defiance against an alien overseer. A scientist's breakthrough in a hidden laboratory. Moments of pain. Moments of hope. Moments of absolute, unbreakable human spirit. The quantum neural network became a living archive of human resilience. Subjugated species across the galaxy began to wake up, not through conventional communication, but through a form of empathetic resonance that defied every known principle of information transfer. The Dominar's communication networks, designed to control, to suppress, to categorize, became conduits of liberation. It's more than a broadcast, Nakamura explained to Commander Chen, her voice trembling with the magnitude of what was happening. We're not just sharing information. We're sharing consciousness. On a mining colony in the Epsilon Quadrant, a worker's neural suppressor suddenly malfunctioned. But it wasn't a technical failure. It was a conscious choice. The device that had been designed to limit, to control, to suppress, became a conduit of liberation. Marcus, the young maintenance drone operator, was orchestrating something unprecedented. The agricultural and mining networks he had spent years preparing were no longer just communication channels. They were living neural pathways of resistance. Each piece of machinery became a potential point of awakening. A cooling system in a refinery, a navigation computer on a transport ship, a maintenance drone's predictive algorithm. Everything became a potential vector of rebellion. The Dominar's most sophisticated control mechanisms were being rewritten from within. Commander Chen's consciousness expanded beyond the 12 ships. Through the quantum neural network, she could feel the awakening. Billions of minds, previously suppressed, now finding their voice, their potential. We're not just fighting a war, Chen reported to Dr. Rodriguez. We're giving birth to a new form of existence. The broadcast carried more than information. It carried emotion, memory, the fundamental essence of human experience. A laborer's transport ship in the outer colony suddenly changed course. Not through an external command, but through a collective decision. The neural suppression systems that had controlled their movements for years suddenly became transparent. The workers could see the mechanisms of their own oppression. And they chose to resist. On an agricultural world, crops began to grow in patterns that were more than agricultural. They became communication arrays. Living message systems that carried information through microscopic variations in chlorophyll density, in root network connections. The Dominar's surveillance systems began to experience cascading failures. How do you monitor a resistance that doesn't follow any traditional pattern of rebellion? How do you control a communication network that isn't linear, that isn't predictable? Dr. Rodriguez's quantum communication hub became something more than a command center. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of resistance. Each data stream was a potential revolution. Each communication packet carried the potential for total systemic transformation. Consciousness cascade reaching critical mass, Rodriguez reported. But it wasn't a clinical observation. It was a moment of profound wonder. The 12 ships were no longer just a military unit. They had become a living transmission network, a consciousness amplification system that was fundamentally rewriting the rules of existence. Subjugated species began to recognize something profound. Resistance wasn't just about fighting. It was about remembering. About maintaining the fundamental essence of individual and collective identity in the face of total suppression. The Dominar had believed they could control consciousness. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Humanity wasn't just fighting a war. Humanity was teaching the galaxy what it meant to be truly alive. The war room was unlike any strategic command center in galactic history. Holographic displays shifted like living organisms, each projection a dynamic ecosystem of potential rather than a static map of conflict. Commander Sarah Chen stood at the center, her consciousness simultaneously present in multiple locations: the 12 ships, the quantum communication hub, and various resistance nodes across multiple star systems. Dr. Elena Rodriguez manipulated the displays with a touch that was part scientific precision, part artistic expression. Traditional warfare is a linear system, she explained to the assembled resistance leaders, a diverse collection of beings from species long thought to be permanently subjugated. We're creating a multidimensional resistance network that doesn't just respond to the Dominar. We anticipate. We transform. The strategy was deceptively simple, yet profoundly complex. Instead of attacking the Dominar's centralized power structures, the human-led resistance was systematically dismantling their entire technological and social infrastructure from within. Aisha Nakamura had developed what she called cognitive cascade warfare. Each resistance action was designed not just to cause immediate damage, but to create exponential systemic failures in the Dominar's control mechanisms. A communication network disruption in one sector would trigger cascading failures in seemingly unrelated systems hundreds of light years away. Marcus, the young maintenance drone operator, had become a critical strategist. His intimate understanding of industrial and agricultural systems allowed the resistance to turn the Dominar's own infrastructure into a weapon of liberation. Cooling systems became communication arrays. Mining lasers transformed into precision psychological warfare tools. We're not fighting a war, Chen explained to a council of liberated species. We're performing a systemic reset of galactic power dynamics. The 12 ships were more than a military unit. They were living computational nodes, each vessel a dynamic strategy generator that could adapt faster than any known predictive algorithm. Where traditional military strategies relied on preset tactical doctrines, these ships generated approach vectors that were part mathematical calculation, part collective human creativity. A Dominar communication hub would experience a total systems failure, not through a direct attack, but through a complex series of interactions that would appear almost random to traditional scanning systems. A maintenance drone's slightly altered flight path would trigger a communication encryption failure. A microscopic variation in an agricultural crop's growth pattern would become a communication node that would ultimately bring down an entire surveillance network. Dr. Rodriguez's quantum communication hub had become something extraordinary. It wasn't just a command center. It was a living, breathing computational ecosystem. Each data stream was a potential revolution. Each communication packet carried the potential for total systemic transformation. The Dominar believe in absolute control, Rodriguez explained. We believe in absolute potential. The Resistance's grand strategy targeted the fundamental assumptions of the Dominar's control mechanism. Their neural suppression technologies, their communication networks, their belief in hierarchical power structures. On a molecular level, the human-developed nanoviral systems were rewriting the very computational foundations of Dominar technology. But it wasn't just a technological attack. It was a philosophical assault on the very concept of control. Liberated species began to develop their own adaptive resistance strategies. A methane-breathing species from the outer colonies transformed their industrial refineries into communication networks. A silicon-based life form used geological communication patterns to coordinate resistance actions. Commander Chen's consciousness expanded. She wasn't just commanding a military operation. She was orchestrating a fundamental reimagining of galactic power dynamics. We're not just fighting, she told the Resistance Council. We're teaching the galaxy what freedom actually means. The 12 ships moved through space like living thought experiments. Each vessel a node in a distributed consciousness that was fundamentally rewriting the rules of existence. They didn't just attack. They transformed. They evolved. The Dominar had believed they understood the concept of control. They were about to learn how little they truly comprehended. The final confrontation wasn't a battle. It was a metamorphosis. Commander Sarah Chen's consciousness expanded beyond the physical limitations of space and time. The 12 ships had become something more than a military unit. They were a living, breathing manifestation of human potential. Each vessel carried the collective memories, traumas, hopes, and indomitable spirit of generations of resistance. The Dominar's central command structure, a massive computational nexus that had controlled galactic civilization for millennia, began to disintegrate. But it wasn't destruction. It was transformation. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from the quantum communication hub, her hands moving across holographic interfaces that pulsed with living data. We're not just defeating a system, she reported to the Resistance Council. We're rewriting the fundamental understanding of consciousness, of civilization, of potential. The Dominar had believed in absolute control, in hierarchical power structures, in the suppression of individual and collective identity. Humanity was about to show them the true meaning of evolution. The 12 ships moved as a single, living neural network. Each vessel was simultaneously a weapon, a communication node, a memory repository, and a catalyst for galactic transformation. Where traditional warfare sought to destroy, these ships sought to liberate, to awaken, to transform. Aisha Nakamura's cognitive cascade warfare reached its ultimate expression. The Resistance's neural network wasn't just attacking the Dominar's infrastructure. It was revealing the fundamental lie of their control mechanism. Every suppressed memory became a weapon. Every moment of human defiance a quantum disruption. Marcus, the young maintenance drone operator who had become a key strategist, watched in awe as entire planetary systems began to awaken. Communication networks that had once been tools of suppression now became conduits of liberation. Industrial systems transformed into living resistance nodes. The Dominar's most sophisticated predictive algorithms began to experience total systemic failure. How do you predict an enemy that doesn't think in linear terms? An enemy that sees potential where others see limitations. An enemy that transforms challenge into opportunity. We're not just fighting. Commander Chen's consciousness broadcast across multiple star systems. We're teaching the galaxy what it means to be truly alive. The final confrontation wasn't about territory. It wasn't about resources. It was about the fundamental nature of existence. Liberated species from across the galaxy joined the Resistance, not through traditional military alliance, but through a quantum neural network that transcended physical limitations. A methane-breathing species from the outer colonies, silicon-based life forms, energy beings, carbon-based humanoids. Each brought their unique perspective, their unique potential. The 12 ships became a catalyst, a living demonstration that true power comes not from control, but from potential, from the ability to adapt, to transform, to see beyond the limitations imposed by others. Dr. Rodriguez's quantum communication hub transformed into something that defied traditional understanding. It wasn't a command center. It was a living ecosystem of resistance, of potential, of hope. The Dominar's central command structure began to collapse, but it wasn't a violent destruction. It was a fundamental reimagining of galactic civilization. Systems of control dissolved. Hierarchical power structures crumbled. In their place, something extraordinary emerged. A network of civilizations. Connected, adaptive, alive. Commander Chen's consciousness expanded to its ultimate potential. She was no longer just a military leader. She was a living testament to human potential, to the power of resistance, of hope. The 12 ships moved as a single living organism, each vessel a node in a distributed consciousness that was fundamentally rewriting the rules of existence. We are not defined by what is done to us. Chen's consciousness broadcast across the galaxy. We are defined by our capacity to transform, to imagine, to become. The Dominar had thought they understood control. They were about to learn the true meaning of potential. Humanity wasn't just fighting a war. Humanity was teaching the galaxy what it meant to be alive.